from the city that never sleeps. 17 miles from Madison Square Garden, New York City. It's America at Night with Rich Valdez, America's favorite late-night talk program, featuring interesting guests from around the world and calls from across America. And now, here is your host, Rich Valdez.
Hi there, good evening, and what's up, America? I am Rich Valdez, and you can hear my voice is a little raspy today. This is hopefully the tail end of this bout of bronchitis I've been dealing with. Unbelievable. So bear with me. It's not an imposter. I'm not AI. It's the real me. It's just very raspy. So I'll be nursing my raspy voice with some tea and lemon throughout the evening. But we're still bringing you everything we've got to bring you. And one of the things I wanted to talk about tonight was the Titan submarine. Of course, that's a trending story today where they believe they found some human remains, but they're not sure because obviously it was an implosion and it destroyed so much of what it came in contact with. But there's a few things I want to kind of lay out for tonight. First of all, there are reports from NBC News trying to, at least in my opinion, trying to cover or normalize the chant that was heard at the New York City Pride Parade that we played here last, I think it was on Friday, and then we played it again on Monday, where they said, "We're here, we're queer, and we're coming for your children." I don't know if you remember that, but I think we have the audio. Listen to this. Wow. Yeah, that happened. And NBC News put out a report with a headline saying, "We're coming for your children" chant at New York City drag march elicits, oh, now it's a New York City drag march. I thought it was an LGBTQ pride march. Maybe that's one and the same. Drag march elicits outrage, but activists say it's taken out of context. Listen, you've got to be a very special kind of stupid to tell people that you're coming for their children. Really, that's all I want to say. Children have never been part of any type of recruitment, right? I mean, other than like, you know, the cereal box with the prize in it or whatever back in the days, those were on the lower shelves so little kids could see them. You can market to kids, but this isn't marketing to kids. This is saying you're coming after them. And again, I've talked about this already. I've said everything I have to say. But when they double down and say that this was taken out of context, I say, no, screw you, you're full of it. That's fake, it's phony, it's fraud. That's just not even true. This was them taking a dig. This is them saying, oh, let's get all those homophobes riled up. At least that's how I take it. Because that's how they see you, right? If you don't live your life the way they do, then you're automatically a homophobe. You and me, many of us think if you're a homophobe, then you're afraid of homos. But that's not necessarily how they would define it. Anybody that disagrees or takes exception to is a homophobe. So anyway, that's the headline from NBC News. And there was some analysis on this that I was reading that was interesting. Because now conservatives are being criticized. Those in the religious communities are being criticized by this NBC News report claiming that the "We're coming for your children" chant has been used for years. And if it has, well, shame on them for years, right? And shame on us for not catching them sooner and putting it out there so that people can know exactly what's going on. I mean, honestly, I get that there is a part of the culture, the LGBTQ plus culture, that celebrates kink, right? I mean, since the days of the Village People, right? The one guy, when I was a kid, I thought that guy was a motorcycle rider, the guy, there was an Indian, a construction worker, and, I had no idea. I was into WWF at the time, which is now known as WWE. And my grandmother had that album of the Village People, and I was like, oh, are those guys wrestlers? And she was like, yeah. I was like, oh, okay. So I thought they were wrestlers. But it's funny that, as you get older, you laugh at that stuff. And it's funny. It's funny until it's not just them amongst themselves in amongst consulting adults. When they're marching down the street saying that they are coming for your children, this is clearly, in my opinion, crossing the line. But what's worse is for the media to come and say that this is a chant that's been used for years at Pride events, according to longtime march attendees and activists who say it's one of many provocative expressions used to regain control of slurs against LGBTQ people. All right, so let's try it out. Let's say you want to issue a slur against me because I'm Hispanic. Let's just say you call me something derogatory, and I go, I'm Hispanic, I'm coming for your children. Did I just regain control of anything? I don't think so. I think I just stepped in something, right? I just stepped into something that could be very, very bad, potentially. And I think this whole thing is stupid. Shame on NBC News for even writing this story to say that, that this was taken out of context and, this is a normal thing. It's not a normal thing. It's not. There's not a person out there that wants to. Okay, there's one person out here, the guy from NBC News that wrote this. Nobody else believes that. Everybody. As they posted this on Twitter, on the NBC News Twitter account, beneath it says readers added context. They thought people might want to know. Even their headline is being corrected, as in, and again, it says here, the "Coming for Your Children" chant has been used for years at Pride events. Whether it has or it hasn't, it's not good. So to sit there and say, children have been kidnapped for years. No, not good, right? It doesn't matter how long something bad has been happening. It doesn't make it any less bad. You don't come after anybody's kids. That's always been the case. Now, it's interesting that in the backlash to this, there are people from the left and from the right and from the middle and people that are apolitical and people in the LGBT community themselves that are coming out against this stuff. As they should. Right? When on earth has it ever been commonplace to respond to criticism of you or your movement or your lifestyle or whatever and say, I'm coming for your children? Right? Every time somebody calls me a right-wing nut or then they call me worse, imagine if I said, oh, well, I'm coming for your children. Just imagine what that would look like. That's insanity. Anyway, I'm trying not to harp on this, but there was an article on it and I wanted to share it with you. So that's that. Now, Yevgeny Prigozhin, he is the head of the Wagner group, the mercenaries that were working for Putin and then momentarily said, hold up, we're going to, at least, per the story, we're going to go against Putin. And some are saying this was engineered from the inside. Others say it's something else. I don't know. So we're going to get into a conversation on that in a little bit with somebody that actually worked for Putin. And he's coming up next. Plus, I want to get into a conversation on the latest attack on kids. And I say attack because you've got to be crazy to let kids do this. Kids are now identifying as furry animals. And it's a whole thing, right? I mean, it's like a movement of them identifying as animals in furry costumes. And some schools are saying, it's all right, let them do it. And that, it's a normal thing for expression. I don't know. I think first you identify as a different gender. Now you're saying you identify as a different species. That is lunacy to me. But we're going to get to the bottom of that with Teresa Lusk a little bit later on. And, of course, Bidenomics was launched today. Bidenomics is, just like it sounds, the economic plan from President Biden. He's touting his wonderful economy that has brought us into the highest inflation we've seen in 40-something years. And former economist at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, he's going to join us to break it down a little bit later. But first, we're going to hear from somebody that used to work from Vladimir Putin and get the scoop on Russia. Don't go anywhere.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez.
Thank you, Rich, and thank you for everything. I know you very well, and I listen, but I have a lot of people that listen, and they love your show, and I appreciate it very much.
America at Night with Rich Valdez.
It's hard to tell, but he's clearly losing the war in Iraq. He's losing the war at home, and he has become a bit of a pariah around the world. And it's not just NATO. It's not just the European Union. It's Japan. It's 40 nations.
All right, that's President Biden referring to the war in Ukraine as the war in Iraq, saying, I think Putin's losing the war in Iraq. And, of course, he misspoke, and I'm not going to make fun of him and call him Joe El Baboso Biden or anything like that. I'll leave that for the 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock hour. But I do want to play you an additional piece of audio from Secretary of State Antony Blinken, also describing the latest on what's going on in Russia. Check this out.
This last episode, showing to some extent the internal dimensions of this failure, I think speaks volumes. But I don't want to predict where this is going to go, when it's going to get there. I do know that Putin has a lot of new questions that he has to answer for.
So Putin has a lot of questions that he has to answer for. Again, that's Secretary Antony Blinken. We also have someone that's going to give us a couple of answers to this. He used to work for Putin at one point, senior analyst for Russian and European affairs at the Center for Security Policy and former economic advisor to Russian President Vladimir Putin, Andrei Illarionov. Welcome.
Thank you for inviting me, Rich.
My pleasure. And I want to, I found it fascinating. This is the first time I've spoken with somebody who once worked, for Putin and has kind of a bird's eye view of what's going on. So I'm really eager to have this conversation, and so that the audience can hear your perspective on this. Now, we've seen so much in recent days, Doc. What's your assessment on whether this is a contrived stunt between Putin and Prigozhin, or was this really Prigozhin trying to launch a mutiny?
First of all, if you don't mind, I would say that I always considered my participation not as a work for Putin, but as a work for President of Russia.
Yeah, I would too.
We can sense the difference. So it's not a personal matter; it's a matter
you serve the
working
office
for the national institutions. Certainly, at that moment, it happened that Putin happened to be the president. But before that, I was working as economic advisor to a number of prime ministers of Russia and a number of other officials. So that is why, once again, it's not a personal issue, but the institutional one. As for your question concerning this mutiny, what we need to know first, that was not a personal issue of Prigozhin or Wagner Group against Putin. Neither Prigozhin nor Wagner ever mentioned their goal as aiming at Putin, overthrowing Putin, or changing political regime, or anything like that. What they wanted to get are only guarantees from disbandment of their company within the Russian military and security forces. That was the main goal, and Prigozhin many times mentioned that it's the only goal, and that is why the only problem that he had is the Minister of Defense, Shoigu, and the Chief of General Staff, Gerasimov. And with all these theater that we watched over 24 hours, the main goal of Prigozhin has been achieved. The company Wagner has not been disbanded. It has been relocated, at least according to the latest news, to Belarus. But the whole structure looks like has been saved. So that is why we should say that probably to some extent, to some substantial extent, this Prigozhin's mutiny happened to be relatively successful.
Right. Now, politically speaking, and again, I'm an outsider looking in, you have a better purview of this, but I look at this and I think, there's the battle that you fight in the battlefield, and there's the battle that you fight in the public eye. And the battle in the media, to me, looks like Prigozhin. I agree with you that it was successful, but it also looks like he took a shot at Putin and has been successful. People were saying he would be a dead man. He's made it to Belarus. People said he wouldn't make it alive. He's there. He's fine. So does this, in my opinion, it makes Putin look somewhat weakened, as if he had to capitulate here. Is that the consensus abroad, or is that just me?
No, you're absolutely right. This is a huge blow to Putin, and Putin has experienced unbelievable public humiliation, no doubt. Never before, for almost 24 years of his grip on the Russian top of the power, he never had anything similar to what he had during the 24 hours. And this was not only public demonstration of his weakness of all kinds, personal weakness, institutional weakness, power weakness, but it also demonstrated how much he has been frightened. And fear that has engulfed him has been demonstrated by him each time when he appeared on screens and in what he was doing during this period of mutiny. He called for help. This is unbelievable in the Russian history. He called for help leaders of Belarus, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Turkey. Never before in the history of Russia, for all these centuries, none of the leaders of Russia would do anything like that. And also, Putin himself left Kremlin, left Moscow, and flew to his residence 400 kilometers northwest of Moscow to Valdai, which also demonstrated what his feeling was about that. And even he promised in his early Saturday morning statement that he will push down this mutiny. He did nothing to Prigozhin and to Wagner Group. So that is why he publicly was not able to fulfill his promises. So which definitely would demonstrate it to, first of all, to the Russian public, to the Russian regime, and certainly to the outside world, how weak he happened to be.
All right. And this, I just find it fascinating because, again, I'd never seen it, and I thought, Putin looks really bad here, and I don't know what he's going to do to save face. So I'm glad I wasn't alone on that one. Now, the first response that President Biden had was the United States had nothing to do with this. You don't have to answer it now because we're going to take a quick break and come right back. But I'd like you to weigh in on that, if you could, when we come back, if you think there was anybody else kind of encouraging the Wagner Group to do what they did. Folks, we are on with our guest, Andrei Illarionov. I hope I said that right. Senior analyst for Russian and European Affairs, Center for Security Policy, and former chief economic advisor to the president of Russia, who happened to be Vladimir Putin at the time. We're coming right back. Don't move a muscle.
America at Night with Rich Valdez.
All right, America, welcome back. Rich Valdez, and we're having a really interesting conversation with the former economic advisor to the Russian president, who happened to be Vladimir Putin at the time, Andrei Illarionov. Illarionov. Did I get it right this time?
Yes, thank you.
All right.
You are correct.
Thank you. I don't want to mess up your name, because people do that to me all the time, and I hate it. So I try to pay it forward. Okay. Now, you're also senior analyst for Russian and European Affairs at the Center for Security Policy. And prior to the break, I had asked you for your opinion on what happens moving forward, and did anybody encourage the Wagner Group or Prigozhin to take this action. What are your thoughts?
Now, from what we know now, we don't see any particular participation, definitely from outside. There might be some involvement of some military and security officials within Russia who usually support much more hawkish actions on the front in the war against Ukraine and within Russia, because Prigozhin and Wagner Company definitely is much more aggressive, much more hawkish, and much more brutal part of the Russian military and security forces, no doubt. So that is why it might be some people within the political regime and military infrastructure would support them, but definitely nobody from outside. And once again, the issue was the main issue, and there is no other explanation so far provided that it would be different explanation. The main issue was the possibility of disbandment of this company and probably some issues with personal security for Prigozhin, for his commanders, and for his soldiers. So that is why that was the main goal that they were trying to solve. But one very important observation we need to make using your question, because you asked about the Biden administration approach.
Yes.
And this is something absolutely new, qualitatively new, that we learned during this weekend, that some people only had some expectations or some possible announcements, but now there is a public confirmation. Biden administration publicly sided with Putin against Ukraine. During this crisis, Biden administration provided pressure, put pressure on Ukrainian authorities not to exploit this temporal weakness of Putin and not to attack Russian forces on the front. Moreover, they pressed Ukrainians not to attack, quotation, offensive assets on the Russian side. And it appears that Ukrainians were forced to fulfill this requirement, this demand from the Biden administration. So that is why in the critical moment for Putin's regime, and this is true, that is one of the most serious crises in Putin's of the Putin's regime. So Biden administrations switched sides and allied with Putin against Ukrainian. So it's obviously that such moment can be used and must be used to achieve the goals of the Ukrainian counteroffensive, to liberate Ukrainian territory occupied by Russian forces, to liberate millions of people who happen to be on these occupied territories. And at this critical moment, the Biden administration switched sides and actually stabbed Ukrainians in the back because they essentially forbade Ukrainians to continue their offensive in the goal to liberate occupied Ukrainian territories. And because Ukraine is critically depends on the United States in receiving military aid,
right,
Ukrainians were forced to comply. So, and even more, some publications, including Washington Post, CNN, Financial Times, Politica, all of them saying that through this crisis, it became clear, and actually Biden administration made it as clear by itself, that the strategy of the Biden administration in this Russian-Ukrainian war, not to allow Ukrainians to win this war in such a way that it would lead to this to removal of Mr. Putin from power, on decomposition of Putin's regime. So the main goal of Biden's administration to keep Putin in power, to preserve him in power, to save him from any crisis. And instead of put him to the Hague, to the special tribunal for military criminals,
Right,
to
for war
bring
crimes.
Putin to the negotiations table. And they would like to discuss with Putin several issues, including future of Ukraine and future of security guarantees for Europe. And that has been officially proclaimed by the person whom you already invited to listen to a little bit early, Antony Blinken, Secretary of State, who made such a statement a few weeks ago in Helsinki. And after that, repeated those statements after that during his press conference. But it is now not only public proclamation what they would like to achieve, but this is actual actions during one of the most serious crises for Putin's regime. So now we know that if and when next crisis, such or similar, will happen for Putin again, Biden administration would once again come for saving Putin, for helping Putin, to supporting Putin, preserving him from the downfall. And this is probably the most important new knowledge that we got from this crisis.
Folks, we are on with Andrei Illarionov. He is a former economic advisor to the Russian president at the time, Vladimir Putin. He's currently senior analyst for Russian and European affairs at the Center for Security Policy. Now, Doc, I want to ask you a question. What you just described, this siding with the wrong side and stabbing them in the back. Would you say this is cowardice to act on behalf of the Biden administration or complicity?
All right. We can say this is a strategy because for all these 6 months of this new stage of full-scale war that Putin launched against Ukraine, many people, everybody who can watch all this brutal aggression, kept asking questions why military assistance that U.S. administration is giving to Ukraine is so small, is so minimal, because it's not enough even to sometimes to stay the line, not even more for counteroffensive. People ask questions why the so-called sanctions policy of Biden brought Putin 400 billion new additional profits and increased Russian GDP by 21% in dollar terms. This is absolutely unique result for the whole history of any country under sanctions. Due to these profits, due to this present from Mr. Biden, Putin was able to increase substantially government expenditure and especially military expenditure. He increased massively military expenditures using these resources received due to Biden's policy to produce more weaponry, to hire more people, to mobilize more people, and to continue this brutal war against Ukraine. So people kept asking why some basic armaments like missiles, like tanks, like jets are not provided to Ukraine. Why this military is so small? Why such a sanction policy that helping Putin, not Ukraine? And there was no clear answer on all those questions. Now we got those answers. The answer is very clear. This is a strategy that is being pursued by Biden administration for all these 6 months of this war.
Playing both sides.
Essentially, the Biden administration is saying that, okay, we are supporting Ukraine. Supporting, yes, that's true. There is some support is being provided, but only up to the point. Right. And now we know there's a point. The point is, yes, you can do something. You can move few meters or few kilometers, and you can get some of the occupied territories. But what you are not allowed to do, you are not allowed to touch Putin. You are not allowed to destroy the regime. You are not allowed to for regime change. But we all know that as long as Putin in Kremlin, he will continue the war against Ukraine. He never hid this goal to destroy sovereignty and nationhood of Ukraine. He never hid that he's going to continue his aggressive policy against Georgia, Moldova, Baltic countries. And if he succeeds, he would continue his aggression against other European countries. So that is why, and this is not a secret, it's not a secret for
Right,
Biden.
no, he wrote about this.
Yeah, no, it's an open fact, and he repeated so many times, no, there is no secret at all. So Biden administration knows that very well. So that is why by preserving Putin in power, Biden administration consciously oriented on continuing Putin's aggression against neighbors of Russia.
All right, Doc, we're going to hang on right here, and we're going to come right back. Folks, we're on with Dr. Andrei Illarionov, former economic advisor to the Russian president and current senior analyst for Russian and European affairs at the Center for Security Policy. We're coming right back.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. This is America. This is Night. This is Rich Valdez.
President Putin's conviction that he can outlast Ukraine and he can outlast all of us. The more we are able to disabuse him of that notion, the more likely it is that at some point he'll come to the table.
All right, that is Secretary Anthony Blinken, and I tend to think that after the public embarrassment on the global stage, that maybe this will be a little bit accelerated. We'll see if they come to the table and what is in store for Russia and Ukraine in the short future. Our guest is Dr. Andrei Illarionov. He is the senior analyst for Russian and European affairs at the Center for Security Policy, and he's the former chief economic advisor to the Russian president at the time, Vladimir Putin. Doc, what do you think happens from here on out?
I think it's very good that you put this quote from Mr. Blinken, just that played a few seconds ago, because it demonstrates how wrong is the Biden administration in their understanding of Putin and Putin's regime.
Right.
They publicly saying that they would like to bring Putin to the negotiations table. And Mr. Putin told many times that he's not interested in negotiations. He's interested in destruction of Ukraine, in destruction of statehood, sovereignty, the Ukrainian nations itself. As we know how Russian troops are destroying the Ukrainian textbooks, history, everything that's associated with Ukrainian culture. Putin, is ready to go to negotiation table only after he finishes his job, about which he said so many times. So that is why by putting this goal, bringing Putin to the negotiations table, Biden administration is doing everything possible and impossible to continue this war, to giving Putin opportunity to kill more Ukrainians, to destroy more civilian objects in Ukraine, and to bring more destruction to this nation. This is very clear and very persistent strategy that is not only proclaimed, but being executed by the White House.
So, short of regime change, it seems like there's some massive sign of force from the office of the President of the United States. And again, maybe it's not Biden, maybe it's some future president, to kind of put him in his place and say, hey, look, this is over, because if you don't, this is going to happen. It seems like this will be the status quo, this unending war.
At this moment, definitely yes, because this is the official position of the current administration. Because what are they doing? Not only what they're saying it's clearly, but what they're doing is just to prolong this war as long as possible, and just to bring as more destructions to Ukraine as possible. Just because they set up the absolutely wrong, unfulfilled goal. this goal cannot be fulfilled because Putin would not go to negotiations table until Ukraine is destroyed or until Ukraine would win this war. But Ukraine can win this war only by achieving replacement of the current Putin's political regime in Russia. There is no other way.
Yeah.
So that is why blocking this particular direction, Biden administration is doing everything possible to continue this war.
Now, Dr. Illarionov, I want you to let everybody know how they can follow the work that you're doing. If there's a website or a social media handle you would like to plug, please let us know.
Yes, so I'm working with the Center for Security Policy. You're welcome to visit website of the center, as well as my personal live journal blog, Twitter, Facebook, Telegram channel. So all of them are available, and there is information both in English and Russian for those who are familiar with that language as well. So it's done on a regular basis every day.
Well, thank you. This was a really enlightening conversation. I really appreciate your candor and your clarity on a topic that I know is confusing to a lot of people. We can barely understand American politics half the time, let alone Russian politics and the geopolitical situation in Europe. Folks, Dr. Andrei Illarionov, he is the senior analyst for Russian and European affairs at the Center for Security Policy and the former chief economic advisor to the Russian president. Doc, I want to thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Rich. All the best.
Likewise. Hope to have you back soon. And, folks, we're going to get to your calls straight ahead. 833-482-5337. Pardon my raspy voice. 833-4-VALDEZ.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. This is America at Night with Rich Valdez.
All right, and to the phones we go, America. 833-482-5337, 833-4-VALDEZ. Let's go to Tom, calling us from WDEL, Philadelphia area. Tom, welcome. You're on with Rich Valdez. Go right ahead.
Hello, Rich. How are you?
I'm all right. A little raspy today. I'm recovering from bronchitis, but thank God.
Yeah, me too. But I wanted to know, was your guest located in the United States of America? And
Yeah.
me, I'm having a hard time believing it because this is right-wing religious propaganda. I'm gay, and my opinion is someone needs to get in there and pop a bullet in your head.
Well, listen to this, Tom. Let me ask you this one. Now, before they pop anything in my head, what do you think about this chant that was at the Pride Parade where they were saying, we're here, we're queer, and we're coming for your children? Do you think it was appropriate to go after people's children?
You got any kids of your own?
I do. Tom? Crickets. Well, Tom, if you're still listening, I'll tell you, me and so many parents like me would take pleasure killing another human being who endangered our children and their lives. And I think that's not a wise thing to do. I don't care what your cause is. Don't say you're coming after people's children. It's not going to go well. Anyway, we're coming back with more conversation. We've got a lot to discuss. It's Rich Valdez, America at Night, and we'll be right back. Bidenomics up next.
Live from the city that never sleeps. 17 miles from Madison Square Garden, New York City. It's America at Night with Rich Valdez, America's favorite late night talk program, featuring interesting guests from around the world and calls from across America. And now, here is your host, Rich Valdez.
Hi there, good evening, and what's up, America? I am Rich Valdez with an S, your liberty-loving Latino amigo, and it's my pleasure to be with you. If you want to join our late-night national town hall conversation, feel free. 833-482-5337, 833-4-VALDEZ. As you know, I've been nursing my voice back to good health because I had some bronchitis, so bear with me and my raspiness tonight. Hour number 2, happy to be here with you. And President Biden has now tripled down on his denial of any involvement in Hunter's business dealings. Of course, that was after, he said he didn't know anything and that Hunter didn't do anything. My son's done nothing wrong. Then Hunter said, all right, I'm pleading guilty to the 2 tax fraud charges. And I'm going to go into a program because I'm an addict on the gun charge. But still, he hasn't done anything wrong. He's the smartest guy that Joe Biden knows. That's that one. Then you've got a government watchdog group has uncovered $200 billion in COVID relief fraud. Man. And in the next hour, we're going to get to a story that little kids are creating and cultivating what they call fursonas. That's right, furry personas. They dress up as furry animals because they identify as animals. And teachers are telling parents, listen, it's not such a big deal. It's okay. And here's why. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. Of course, I want to talk about this poll. Look at this. So President Biden's now touting his Bidenomics through a new poll, though, shows only 34% of the country approves of his handling of the economy. I'm not an economist, but that means 66% don't approve of his handling of the economy. And with a figure like that, that's lower than his overall approval rating. It gives new credence to the term, to the phrase that James Carville once rattled off during the Clinton years, that it's the economy. Stupid. And I think he was right. So I want to get to the bottom of that. And somebody who understands the economy and understands monetary policy better than the rest of us is our guest, David Barker. He's a former economist at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and he's a partner in Barker Companies. They own and manage and develop real estate investments. And I'm curious to hear his thoughts on Bidenomics. But I want to play a quick clip of Joe Biden before we bring in David Barker. Listen to Joe Biden telling America that Bidenomics is working.
Bidenomics is working. When I took office, the pandemic was raging and our economy was reeling. Supply chains are broken. Millions of people unemployed. Hundreds of thousands of small businesses on the verge of closing after so many had already closed. Literally hundreds of thousands on the verge of closing. Today, the U.S. has the highest economic growth rate, leading the world economies since the pandemic, the highest in the world. As Dick said, with his help, we created 13.4 million new jobs. More jobs in 2 years than any president has ever made in 4 and 2. And folks, it's no accident. That's Bidenomics in action. Bidenomics is about building an economy from the middle out and the bottom up, not the top down.
4 and in 2, but 4. Anyway, you gotta just appreciate those moments, I think. Again, our guest, David Barker, former economist at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. David Barker, welcome, sir.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I believe we had you on a couple of months back, and it was an excellent conversation. I said, you know what? If anybody can add some context and some color to this, it's going to be David Barker. So what do you make of this initial comment that Bidenomics is working?
Well, he's taking credit for the economic effects of the end of the pandemic, which is ridiculous. We had this gigantic event that affected the economy. It went away, and so there was economic strength happening from that. But we're no better off than we were previous to COVID. There's no great gains that he can point to from his policies.
Yeah, not only are we no better off, I think we're worse off, right? Inflation was a lot better before then. It's a lot worse now.
Absolutely. And the deficit is much worse also. The COVID spending, which was way more than what was necessary, even Larry Summers, a Democrat economist, said that early on, that the stimulus package that Biden pushed was much, much larger than was needed, and that's what caused inflation. In his speech, he says it's all Russia's fault, but that's not true. It's his fault for pushing too much stimulus.
So, you've got the president here. And again, I know you're an economist, but I mean, this seems to be both an economic and a political issue. I feel like Biden's playing politics here, which is what politicians do. But I just don't know if it's going to work. I can't think of anybody, people that like him even, that are going to say, oh, my gosh, you're right. Bidenomics has been phenomenal. I just bought a new vacation home because of this. I got 3 more raises at my job. While I know the job front isn't as bad as some said it might be, and that's a good thing for America. But I don't think that even with the good job numbers, I don't think that's enough to say that Bidenomics is working. How does anybody reconcile that from your perspective as an economist?
Well, I don't think that they can. And I think a lot of people are worried because inflation is still high and the Federal Reserve is trying to bring it down. And they're bringing it down with high interest rates that are slowing economic growth. There's a real risk of recession because of that. If that happens, just thinking about the politics, then his pushing Bidenomics is going to backfire on him. But he seems to be taking a gamble that we won't go into recession, and no one knows whether that will happen or not.
And that's really the segue to my next question. Is today he made that somewhat authoritatively, I would say. He said, we're not going into a recession. What do you think, that was just a gamble, or do you think he's basing it on something that maybe I'm overlooking?
No, I think it's a gamble. There are a lot of signs that point to recession. Shipping volumes are down, which is often a good indicator. Other indications of weakness, but no one knows if there will be a recession or not. These things are often inherently unpredictable.
So what are your thoughts on how this plays out, from your perspective? Does the recession come in with the job-crushing ability that it can have, or are we spared that aspect of it? What do you think?
Well, that has happened before. The last time that we had high inflation that the Federal Reserve was bringing down,
right.
They raised interest rates, and that caused a major recession with lots of jobs lost, lots of bankruptcies.
You're talking about Volcker.
Yeah, right, exactly. And we don't know whether that will happen again this time. This time there do seem to be labor shortages. Some of that is because labor participation rate still has not gotten back to where it was pre-COVID. So we have labor shortages, and that's keeping wages high and keeping unemployment low. So it may be that we have a business recession. High interest rates will cause problems for businesses without some of the same employment effects that we've seen previously.
Huh. That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, honestly, that would be the better way to weather the storm than full on recession where, everybody's losing their shirt, losing jobs and that type of thing.
Absolutely. The key is whether inflation comes down or not. And inflation seems to be stubborn at, around 5% or so. If you look at the core inflation rate, taking out energy and food, it's really been the rate has been pretty flat over the last several months. The Federal Reserve won't tolerate that. If that continues, they will raise rates more to try and bring that inflation down to 2%, whether it causes recession or not.
Right. Now, and here's where, and again, this is why you're here. Would that be the right thing to do, even though it's the rate has been flat, to continue to bring it down, even though you're inflicting a little bit more pain, just to get it to that 2%? Would that be just for the sake of competition to say, look, we got it as low as it, as Trump's economy, pre-COVID, or is that actually where we need to be in order to see more growth?
Well, that's a great question, because there has been a lot of work on what are called the welfare effects of inflation. In other words, how much pain does a high inflation rate cause? How much damage does it do? And at low rates of inflation, the damage is really not all that severe. An inflation rate of 3% doesn't really do a whole lot more damage than an inflation rate of 2%, as long as it's stable, right? If inflation rates are jumping all over the place, that causes damage and makes it difficult for businesses to understand supply and demand signals. But if inflation is stable at, say, 3% or 4% or 5%, it's not going to do a lot of damage. But the Federal Reserve has promised that they will get inflation down to 2%. And the Federal Reserve, when they make a promise, they want to follow through on it. They want their credibility intact. And so even if inflation at, say, 3% might be just fine, they are going to hammer the economy until they get it down to 2% because that's what they promised.
Yeah, that's doesn't sound like a good look. Folks, we're on with David Barker. He's a former economist with the Federal Reserve Bank in New York. We're discussing Bidenomics, and we're going to talk about a couple of other economic topics on the way back. If you have a question or a comment or something that you want to weigh in on, the phone number 833-482-5337, 833-4-VALDEZ. We're coming right back.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. Call now, 833-4-VALDEZ. That's 833-482-5337. 833-4-VALDEZ. That's Valdez with an S. America at Night with Rich Valdez.
All those major legislations we pass, people go, that's great, but it takes time to get it out in the field. It takes time for them to see it. And I'm not here to declare victory on the economy. I'm here to say we have a plan that's turning things around incredibly quickly.
Well, listen, Biden's been turning things around incredibly quickly through legislation, through executive action, through all sorts of federal agencies, including the Fed. And they've been trying to turn everything into a woke utopia since he started, producing all sorts of things. They're forcing mortgage companies to issue mortgages based on, or at least based on certain credit scores, and give people a certain break based on race. They base things on climate. You name it, that's what they're doing. And when big banks have to produce reports based on climate or any other issue that, falls under that ESG guideline, this is obviously going to restrict their business in various areas. So I want to talk about that, the impact of all of these climate impacts on our economy that are coming from the administration. Our guest, David Barker, he's a former economist with the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and he's the author of the book, Welcome to Free America. David, welcome back.
Thank you.
So what's your take on all of these crazy climate deals that are being pushed through legislation and through executive action?
Well, what I've been writing about lately is the Federal Reserve's action on climate change. Mm-hmm. They really ought to be worrying about inflation and the banking system, but they've put quite a bit of effort into climate. They have a lot of economists working on it. They have conferences. They are, as you said, forcing banks to issue reports on their climate risk. And you would think that with all that effort and with all the brain power they have at the Fed, that they would be doing high-quality research on it. But I took a close look at the climate research that the Fed has been doing and found that it's terrible. The assumptions are all incorrect. The use of data is wrong. Everywhere you look, it's just poor quality research.
So is this more red tape, more bureaucracy? Is this just appeasing the environmentalists on the left, or is there more to it?
Well, I think it is an institution that is trying to be relevant and trying to, increase its political power. And they see this as an issue to, they can jump on the bandwagon of and increase their political power, their authority. And so they're working on it. They're trying to get involved in that issue. But like I say, the research just isn't very good. They were trying to prove that higher temperatures would lead to lower rates of economic growth, and the data just don't show that.
All right, I want to switch gears with you before we run out of time, and I want to ask you about FedNow and this pilot program they have where they've digitized the dollar, and a lot of people are up in arms about this because the government can eventually control it if this gets to the consumer. Now, what they're launching now isn't a consumer version, but it's an interbank version. What's your take on this FedNow
Well,
program?
I do think that central banks around the world intend to get into the digital currency business. They're starting slowly and working out the bugs, but I think they will get there. And digital currency will certainly increase the ability of government to track people, to track economic activity, and to control economic activity. And if you control economic activity, you control pretty much everything.
How's that for a free market? It flies in the face of our system, no?
Well, it flies in the face of political freedom. It gives the opportunity for government to have unbelievable power. And I think history shows that when you give governments power, it's often abused. So I think that people are not wrong to think that this is a potentially dangerous development.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know if this ever gets past Congress. If it doesn't, then that means they don't roll it out to everybody kind of writ large, but they'll still continue to use it internally, right?
Oh, yes, and I think it will be a difficult thing to stop. These kinds of, technology is hard to stop, and other governments around the world will likely move in this direction, and there will be increasing pressure on the U.S. to do the same.
All right. Well, we'll leave it there. I want you to let everybody know how they can, peruse the writings that you're doing and the work that you're working on, and where they could buy a copy of your book, Welcome to Free America.
Oh, well, thank you. So my work on climate change you can find at Econ Journal Watch, and that is a journal that's devoted to critiquing articles in other academic journals. So that's Econ Journal Watch. You can find that on the web. And my book has been available on Amazon. It may be difficult to find, but I think there are still some copies out there.
Outstanding. Well, thank you for joining us. I appreciate it. I hope you'll come back soon. I appreciate your analysis. Godspeed to you, sir. You're a patriot.
Oh, thank you very much.
You bet. All right, folks, more to come straight ahead. They're saying little kids are identifying as furry animals, calling them personalities. What's up with that? We're going to talk about that with Teresa Lusk. Straight ahead, I'm Rich Valdez. Don't go anywhere.
America at Night with Rich Valdez.
All right, America, welcome back. Rich Valdez, Valdez with an S. And our phone number, if you want to join our late night national town hall conversation, feel free to do that. The phone number, 833-482-5337, 833-4Valdez. And listen to this headline. This is a doozy. Parents and teachers warned not to ridicule school kids who identify as animals. Teachers and parents have been warned not to overreact to school kids identifying as furries, people with an active interest in animal characters with human characteristics. What is that, like Garfield the cat? An animal with a human character? That's so funny. A government-backed safeguard says that children dressing up in furry costumes need to feel comfortable while expressing themselves. Now, listen, I'm all about self-expression. I do it every day on the radio, and I don't mind if my kids dress up. But the idea that, we should allow them to explore their identity or their persona or personality, I think that's some crazy. So I want to get to the bottom of that with our guest. And she's been here before. I want to welcome her back. She's host of the Teresa Lusk Show. Teresa Lusk, welcome.
Hey, Rich. Thank you. How are you? I'm
all right. My voice is raspy. I've beaten, what's that called? Bronchitis. But I'm still here. Thank God.
Awesome. Good.
So tell me about this, because I'd heard about this years ago with adults, like about a year and a half ago, and they had conventions and everything, furry conventions. But I didn't know that this had spilled over into children. What can you tell us about it?
Well, of course, it's spilling into children because that's what this crazy culture is doing, right? They're trying to take over our children's minds, and naturally, because these are little seemingly furry little human type animal and human characteristics, I mean, it's naturally going to get the attention of our children. So it seems like it's, innocent. The concerning thing is there's a couple of things that are concerning. One is that, a lot of these furries or fursonas, most of them that belong to this kind of little group are men who have sexual fetishes. So it starts there, some kind of weird little kinky fetishes. And then the other is now our children are being told, the parents are being told, and of course this is a British group, but it spills into the U.S. and the U.S. into other nations and vice versa, that we need to support the children if they feel like identifying as some kind of furry or fursona, and that just goes along with what's going on now with the whole whatever you want to identify as, whether you're a woman or a man or however you, quote, feel, then we need to make it as comfortable as possible so that they can naturally fall into that identity. So there is a problem with that we are starting to see now with this group.
Now, this is interesting because I remember there was some backlash over this. People were saying that this idea about kids dressing up as animals and calling themselves furries, and some were demanding litter boxes. And then it was later challenged as misinformation, saying it wasn't happening, it's not a real thing. But I'd seen entire conventions of adults doing this. And like you said, I think it makes sense where people, try to introduce this to children. Is this, from what you know, exclusive to the United Kingdom or with children, or is it happening all over the place?
I think it's something that's happening all over the place. I think that there aren't any borders or barriers anymore when it comes to let's just, take anything and say we identify with it, or let's just become whatever we want to become. I think you've seen this, we've seen this for those of us who pay attention, those of us with more conservative minds who actually pay attention to the dangers of what is manifesting today. This is an everywhere non-discriminatory issue. And I just think we're seeing it, in situations like this fursona furry thing, but I don't think you'll be able to exclude it in anything anymore, Rich. I just think that from now on, I mean, heck, you can go into a hobby store and say, well, I identify as a yarn today. I mean, that's where we're at, seriously. And it just grows and grows more and more ridiculous. I'm not even trying to be, ugly about it. That's just where we're at.
Right. And what I find interesting here is, and I understand your point, what I don't understand is how the schools or the administrators at these schools justify telling the parents not to overreact and not to interrupt the exploration of their child's fursona. I think that's crazy. What's the rationale behind that?
Well, that's the schools and the school systems that have gone very clearly woke. They want to be able to tell you as a parent how you should raise your children. So they think that you are being abusive if you're not going along with whatever your child, quote, feels like. And so it's not surprising that a school system is telling a parent how they and what they should do with their child. I've been saying this every chance I get. Parents are the gatekeepers. We've got to pay attention to what we're doing and what we're allowing. And if you think that this is just happening in some state, right, over to the left, it's not. It's happening everywhere, even in conservative states like my state, Texas. So we have to pay attention, Rich. And this is no longer just something that's just kind of kids having fun. We have a very woke society that's trying to make sure that identity becomes whatever you want it to be. And we have to make sure we safeguard our children, even with something that's so seemingly innocent, such as little furry animal characteristics and what have you.
So we've gone from the dangers of identifying as the opposite sex to now identifying as animals with human tendencies or humans with animal tendencies amidst people that are known sexual deviants. It's an interesting time to be alive, folks. Our guest is Teresa Lusk. She's host of the Teresa Lusk Show. And if you have a question or a comment, 833-482-5337, 833-4-VALDES. We're coming right back, and the discussion continues on AMC abruptly canceling a film that documented the journey of transgender individuals that detransitioned. Once they got a little backlash, that was done. So we're going to learn about that as well with Teresa Lusk. Don't go anywhere.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. Call now, 833-4-VALDEZ. That's 833-482-5337. 833-4-VALDEZ. That's Valdez with an S.
I want to listen to you, Rich, all the time.
America at Night with Rich Valdez.
All right, America, welcome back. Our guest, Teresa Lusk. She's host of the Teresa Lusk Show. Make sure you check out the program. And I want to talk about this article I'm looking at. AMC abruptly canceling film that documents the journey of detransitioners. So the movie was about detransitioners saying they regretted the choice they made. And the next thing you know, they get a little pressure and it's gone. Laura Becker, who's featured in the film, called out the dangerous precedent on Fox News. And what's interesting here is that the movie, by the way, is called No Way Back, The Reality of Gender-Affirming Care. It shared the stories of 5 young detransitioners and insight from a dozen medical experts on the harm being posed by healthcare providers pushing transition and surgery, or what they call gender-affirming care. And this is according to the piece in Fox News, but this is something that we see all the time. And when you couple this with that audio clip from the drag people that were marching, right, the drag supporters that were marching in the Pride Parade saying, we're here, we're queer, and we're coming for your children, one can't help but think that, man, we're in pretty hot water over here. Listen to this audio. So I played that since Friday, and I'll continue to play it because I think this is a big deal. If they're out there in the streets clamoring this stuff, banging on pots and pans and making a big deal about being queer and coming for your children, where are the parents? What are we saying? Teresa Lusk, what say you?
Well, I think that's exactly, you you just did exactly what needs to be done. You said, where are the parents? What are they doing? You know, at the end of the day, Rich, parents, as I said right before the break, parents are the gatekeepers. We have proof right here that the majority of this group now, I'm not saying every single, because I have seen actually some people that are in this group say, you know, we don't agree with this, but there is a push from the majority of these people to come after your child's mind. They want to defile your child's mind and begin to train them that this is normal, it's acceptable, and this is how God made them. So parents have to rise up because we are the ones. So how do we do that? We begin to nurture their hearts and say, hey, this is who you are. This is your identity. This is not okay. This is not good for you. We underestimate sometimes what our children can take in. Listen, if everybody in the school system and social media and their friends can train your child how to believe about themselves, how much more the parents? Now, obviously, with groups like this that are just being glamorized right now through the media, you have a little bit of a tougher challenge. I've dealt with, you know, and heard a lot of parents complain about the power of the influence that's going on right now. You take a really good child, somebody who is you know, healthy, and they have healthy identities, et cetera, but they begin to feel pressure from this nonsense right here that you just played, people who are promoting it and saying, you know, you're hateful if you don't agree with it. So these children, they begin to feel this pressure because they are not gay, because they are normal, because they are good with their own identity. So they begin to fall into this whole, well, I'm not this, so now I begin to be okay with with this movement of what you just played.
I agree with you. I think this is it's so important that we no longer say, well, you know, look, as long as they don't do it's that we're past that, right? Like, I don't care what you do as long as it doesn't affect me. It's clearly affecting you. They said they're coming after your kids. So I think parents have to stand up and whether they like it or not, right? No parent likes the conflict. Maybe some do. Let me rephrase that. But if you're walking down the street, right, and somebody smacks your kid, it's like your job. You have to smack this person back. You have to protect your kid. And some parents may live for that moment. You know, I wish a brother would. But most of us are passive, right? Most of us are saying, look, I just want to go along and get along. But I think in a moment like this, if they're having a parade about it, at the very minimum, we need to have a parade about it, right? We need to say, look, no, we're here. We're here for our children. And if you're coming for me. And I think that message needs to resound across the country so that this type of chanting goes away and that people understand where we stand.
Agreed. Actually, so I think a lot of, for those of us who really believe that this is not okay, most of us have a faith foundation. And in the faith groups, you're taught to just turn the other cheek. We've overused that scripture, and we teach people, well, you just need to be silent and you need to just be quiet. But Jesus rose up for the things that were unrighteous. And he had a strong voice when it came to that. And I think faith people need to be okay with, and conservative people, even if they're not a faith, what they need to understand is there is a time to rise up and use your voice. And when there is a culture that's trying to dominate, it's time to rise up and defend things and say, no, thank you. We're not going to receive that for our children, and this is what I'm going to stand for. I believe that just like when you see the other issues that went on, like with Target and the Bud Light issue, if you just speak loud enough with your money, your time, your resources, et cetera, you can see this movement push back.
Now, Teresa Lusk, it doesn't stop there, though. It's not just the woke companies and the woke organizations and saying they're coming after your kids. You just mentioned people having a faith foundation. They've now come after faith. Not now, it's been happening for a long time, but I saw a clip over the weekend of a woman conducting a religious service in what appeared to be a church and claiming that Jesus had plural pronouns. And again, I guess you could make that argument as in, you know, the Trinity of the Godhead, but that's not how they meant it. And they were saying that, you know, this was, it was just, in my opinion, it was blasphemous. But I'm going to let you hear it because I just think it's interesting how I might get criticized for my taking exception of this audio clip of these people chanting about they're coming for my children, but yet people are coming for a lot of people's faith and the church, and most of us as Christians are silent on that issue. We'll play that on the other side of this. Folks, we're on with Teresa Lusk, host of the Teresa Lusk Show, and our phone number, 833-482-5337. If you want to get in for open phones, you can start getting in now. It's going to be a busy night tonight, 833-482-5337, 833-4-VALDEZ.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. America at Night with Rich Valdez.
I invite you to rise in body or spirit, and let us confess our faith today in the words of the Sparkle Creed. I believe in the non-binary God, whose pronouns are plural. I believe in Jesus Christ, their child, who wore a fabulous tunic and had 2 dads, and saw everyone as a sibling child of God.
All right, I've heard enough. That's absolute crazy talk. Jesus didn't have 2 dads, but I think she's referring to Joseph and, of course, God the Father. But the way she says it is a double entendre designed to welcome this idea that a household with 2 dads is a normal thing, and that somehow, making at least that's how I received it. How did you take it, Teresa Lusk?
Oh, well, it's actually very disturbing. That's the most satanic thing I've ever heard, number one. Number two, for those who are listening, you just have to be careful. Just because somebody says that they're a church and they're representing Christ and Christianity does not make it so. The Bible is very clear on who the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are. There's no such thing as all that nonsense. So we just have to be very careful. Again, we're in a time of deception, and it's a spiritual deception and it's a natural deception that's going on. So one of the most disturbing things I've ever heard.
Yeah, likewise on my end. And again, it's shrouded in truth, so that if you challenge them, they can say, well, no, we're talking about, his father Joseph and, of course, his heavenly father. But I think it's clear when they start with, we're serving a non-binary God. I don't know God to be non-binary. I think the whole entire Bible refers to him as Abba, God the Father, which sounds pretty binary to me, but I'm not a theologian. And in the 30 seconds that we have remaining, let everybody know how they can watch the Teresa Lusk Show.
Yeah, on our social media pages, Facebook, YouTube, et cetera, the general ones, at the Teresa Lusk Show, or they can go to the website, Teresa Lusk Show.
Outstanding. Teresa Lusk is host of the Teresa Lusk Show, and I hope you check it out. Teresa Lusk, thank you for being here with us. I always appreciate it when you're on.
Thank you. Have a great one.
You bet. Folks, Open Phone America is coming up right now, 833-482-5337. Get your calls in, 833-4-VALDEZ. Lots to talk about and very little time, so I will speak with you then. Don't go anywhere. I'm Rich Valdez.
Live from the city that never sleeps. 17 miles from Madison Square Garden, New York City. It's America at Night with Rich Valdez, America's favorite late night talk program, featuring interesting guests from around the world and calls from across America. And now, here is your host, Rich Valdez.
Hi there, good evening, and what's up, America? I am Rich Valdez, Valdez with an S, at Rich Valdez on all of the social media, your liberty-loving Latino amigo, and our phone number is 833-482-5337, 833-4-VALDEZ. If you're saying, how come Rich sounds like he has puberty again? Well, that's because I lost my voice because I was at a social function. I was at a little bit of a soiree earlier, but it was a little loud, so I was raising my voice a little bit to talk over the noise. And I am still recovering from bronchitis a week ago. And again, interesting, this bronchitis, not a viral bronchitis like most people get. out of the blue. This was bronchitis brought on by me not taking my daily allergy medicine that the doctor said you got to take it during these months, and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, yeah. And I didn't do it. And untreated allergies trigger a bunch of different things, not the least of which are postnasal drip, which can quickly turn into bronchitis and or pneumonia, believe it or not, and a sinus infection. I mean, you name it, it can become a lot of things. But anyway, enough of my ortholaryngeal situation. I am going to bring up a couple of topics here. And some of the topics that I want to talk about tonight are an ABC News story where a nursing home is alleging that, or a nursing home allegedly neglected residents and misused $83 million in funds. That's according to the New York Attorney General. I'll touch on that at the bottom of the hour. But I also want to talk about President Biden because, of course, he unleashed his economic plan today, which is being called by his administration Bidenomics, unlike Ronald Reagan's plan that became known as Reaganomics because the people, there was a groundswell of support. And people said, this stuff works and we're doing better, and gave it that name. So Bidenomics, 34% of people approve of it. 66% of Americans don't approve of it. And maybe it's because Joe Biden showed up with a few marks on his face today to give that speech. Now, they said, what happened to the president's face? Why does he have those marks on? That's because he uses a very tight mask connected to what they call a CPAP machine. I believe that stands for continuous pressure, pulmonary airway pressure. And that's what it is. Now, why do I know this stuff? Because when I was 26 years old, I was diagnosed with sleep apnea. And they gave me two options. I could use a CPAP machine or I could get the surgery. And the surgery consists of the removal of your uvula and your tonsils and other tissue that's around the airway to open the airway and kind of tighten the back of the throat so that nothing vibrates when you breathe, which is what makes that flubbing, snoring sound when people breathe heavy. And that worked for a number of years, but eventually gets loose again, and you got to go back under the knife. And I think I'm due for that now, or I have to start using that mask. Either way, I don't like either of those plans. But interesting. Now, Biden's had this condition for quite a while, but they're bringing it up today because he had these marks on his face. So if you have any calls, thoughts, opinions on CPAP machines or sleep apnea as a whole, happy to discuss that with you. I think it's a very important topic. A lot of people live with this not knowing. They just think they snore really badly, right? People will say things like, oh, my gosh, it's like sleeping next to a wood chipper the way you snore. Oh, it's terrible. And then the choking. And then you stop and you got to push you because it sounds like you die in the middle of your sleep. That's called sleep apnea. The apnea means you stop breathing. And if that's happening to you and you're not treating it with the surgery or the mask, you're putting yourself in danger for a stroke or a heart attack at a way younger age than would ever be necessary. So just a little bit of a tidbit on that. Now, I want to get to some of your calls because we've talked about a lot of things tonight. I want to go to Charleston, South Carolina. Robert, he's on WTMA. Robert, go right ahead. What's on your mind tonight?
Okay, Rich. I just want to give you an idea that, a lot of times when it comes to what we were talking about, to men, older men interested in younger guys and stuff like that, or children or stuff like that. Well,
yeah, I was talking about children. It's not okay to go after children.
Yeah. Okay. Well, anyhow, when I was a youngster, I was a ham radio operator, and there was this guy who bought a piece of radio equipment from me, a balloon, which balances the two sides of a dipole, for example, helps balance them out for better reception and makes transmission better possible, actually. So anyhow, he worked at a radio station, an AM transmitter radio station in Miami, Florida, right at the edge of the Everglades. And,
right. And what happened with this man?
Anyhow. Okay, he said to me, "Do you mind if I pay you for the balloon in front of the warehouse at the Warehouse 8 bar, which is right across the street from the from the Versailles on Southwest A Street in Miami. So I said, no problem at all. So we walked in, and he handed me the money, and then I left. And he just wanted to make it look to the other guys like he was paying me for sex. And I didn't care. I mean, if he wanted to do that, it's fine with him. With me, I mean, it's just.
Now, how do you know that? Did he tell you that, or he specifically brought you to a place where there's prostitution in order for you to sell the radio equipment?
Not. I don't know if there was prostitution, but if it was, it's certainly. I doubt that it was usual there, because even though they did have pictures of risque pictures on the walls of the bar, the guys looked like they might be about 15 years old or something like that. But I doubt that the guys had sex with anybody who was 15. There were just pictures there to make it look like they, so that they'd have something interesting to look like, things that they might be interested in looking at, something like that. But it was. I would say that there was no way that anybody, that there was anything like that going on. I mean, I just can't imagine it. I mean, that was.
I would hope not.
Yeah, I don't even think they'd be allowed in, because the drinking age, I believe, at the time was 18. So that would have been pretty close to impossible. And if anybody were on the borderline, they would have checked their ID. So that would have, unless they had phony ID, which is of course possible, but most people didn't have it. And people who were younger than 18, they had no need to go to a place like that. I mean, they could hang out with guys their own age.
Right.
I mean?
Well, we're getting lost here, but ultimately, I understand your story. The guy wanted to make it look like something was going on when it wasn't going on. And I don't know whether I should give the guy credit or not. It sounds pretty odd, right, Robert, the way he tried to, when you were younger, try to make it look like something was going on. But the whole thing is just fishy to me, and it goes back to this audio clip that we had where people were chanting, we're here, we're coming for your children. I think this is very problematic, and the fact that people would include children, whether it's tongue-in-cheek or not, I think it rubs people the wrong way. And interesting story. I'm glad that you're okay and nothing crazy happened, and I appreciate the call. Big shout out to everybody on WTMA, Charleston, South Carolina. We're going to continue with the rest of your calls straight ahead, 833-482-5337.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. Call now, 833-4VALDEZ. That's 833-482-5337. 833-4VALDEZ. That's Valdez with an S. America at Night with Rich Valdez.
All right, America, we are continuing with your calls, but I want to reference a story from last year. A Michigan man pled guilty after murdering, then eating the testicles of a man that he met on a dating app. Michigan police reportedly found Mr. Kevin Bacon, not the actor, mutilated with his body hanging in Mr. Mark Latunsky's basement. Wow. And he admitted in court last year that he killed 25-year-old hairdresser Kevin Bacon after luring the University of Michigan student to his home in December of 2019, according to mlive.com. Crazy stuff. And I bring that up because I know that one of our callers knows of this story. Let's go to Kim Shields in Shields, Michigan, listening online. Rich Valdez, AmericaAtNight.com. Kim, go right ahead.
Hi, Rich. Kind of surfaced the story there. Yeah, it was because all tonight you've been talking about how society is getting so bizarre and kinky and coming after the kids and stuff. But this one topped it off. It was over by Lansing in southwest Shiawassee County. And it was in a nice neighborhood on a court with like brick nice homes. We couldn't believe it. And after the murder, They met on Tinder, I believe. But after the murder, they questioned the neighbors in this nice area. And they said, well, we've seen other weird stuff. We've seen the two men, the man that lives there and his dates, like chasing each other around the yard with leather skirts and lace on and stuff.
Oh, boy.
And it was just really, really bizarre. And, yeah, like you said, this young guy was killed and partially eaten. But I think the guy, the Mark Latunsky, has already been sentenced to prison, I think. But you know what I think this is, Rich?
Now, are these friends of yours, Kim?
Oh, you asked me that another time. No, it was in the news.
Just double checking.
You asked me that with that other one that put his girlfriend in the closet. But I think this is Satan, and I think it's gotten so bad in the last 2.5 years since Biden's been in. I mean, where else would you see men with lipstick and beards and high heels stealing women's luggage at the airport, men meeting and, you know what I mean, and killing and eating part of, so it's, do you think it has,
crazy.
It's gotten so much worse since Biden, and do you think it's Satan and we really have to fight it,
Yeah, I think it's definitely Satan. I think if you believe in God, you believe in the devil. And, you believe in good and you believe in evil. And you try, obviously, to follow everything that's good and holy, and you do the right thing. But it doesn't mean that the bad thing isn't there and it doesn't exist. And we would be silly to ignore it, right? We would be naive. And it would be dangerous if we lived in a world where we didn't look over our shoulder from time to time. Maybe many of you don't do that. I know I do. And I think it's a good practice, especially if you're in New York or the surrounding areas, because you never know what's coming your way. But the reality is we have to be prepared. We have to be vigilant. We have to know what's going on. We can't always just sit there and think that everything's hunky-dory. We've just, stay vigilant, stay prepared. That's what I think, Kim.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I just want to point out to the LGBT people that they're not doing themselves any favors by all this extreme bizarrity, and we're queer, we're here, and we're coming after your kids, and it just the parades where they mock twerking. I had to have somebody tell me what twerking was, but they're, is really going down the street partially naked, feigning sex acts and stuff. It's the devil. Satan. I believe it is. And thanks for taking my call, Rich. And I have allergies. My eye was watering all day today, and both my eyes were. Yeah.
All of this hit me in my adulthood. I didn't have allergies growing up as a kid. I hit 30 and they started, and they seem to have gotten worse in my 40s. It's just crazy. I don't know if it's my allergies that are getting worse, or the air quality is getting worse, or more pollen in the air. I mean, I'd never seen my car as green as I'd seen it in the last couple of months. So I think we definitely had a rough allergy year. But needless to say, take that stuff serious, because you'll end up sounding like me. Yeah. Thank you, Kim.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. And again, crazy story. Thanks for bringing it to my attention. This guy, again, the headline, Michigan man pleads guilty after murdering, then eating the testicles of the man he met on the dating app. That is nuts. We're talking about cannibalism here. And they're not Kim's friends, but they are from her part of town in Michigan. So watch out if you're in Michigan. All right, let's see. Where do we go from here? We go to Bowling Green, Kentucky, WKCT. Check in with our friend Jim. Jim, go right ahead. You're on with Rich Valdez. Welcome.
Rich, you sound a little rough. Hope you get feeling better.
Thank you, brother. Yeah. It's really just the voice. I feel fine, but the voice is eluding me today.
Yeah, I hear you. Listen, all this we've been talking about, the Sparkle Creed, trying to normalize homosexuality, violence against each other, destroying everything that we base this country on. And the people on the left, and I guess it's on the, I don't know if I really should say left, whatever, the people that believe these things, I believe are a small percentage of our population, maybe 10% of it, maybe less. But they make Joseph Goebbels look like an amateur for brainwashing people and PR. They've gone way beyond where we've ever been before.
Yeah, I would agree that they're really good at the squeaky wheel getting the oil. It's amazing how good they are in their messaging strategy. And this is why I think if you take exception to that, you have to make sure that you're just as equally heard, right? I don't think it's enough to say, well, I'm not into that. Let them do their thing. That's fine. Let them do their thing. But you've got to be, loud and proud about your beliefs, because they're being loud and they're being proud and they're having parades. And if we don't compete at that level, whether it's radio, television, whatever, we have to get this message out and coalesce people. Ultimately, any movement is successful if you can raise the money and coalesce people. Once you can do that, you can change things. I think that's why, Trump and I know there's Obama were really good at galvanizing people, because they were able to do that. They were able to raise the necessary funds to make the moves that they had to make. And they definitely do that in the LGBTQ movement. They're experts at it. And I think those that take exception, not to their lifestyle or their choices, but to the message that someone's coming after your children, if you don't like that, then you've got to make yourself heard, at least in my opinion. That's where I'm at, Jim.
The balance being is, I mean, how aggressive do you get? And that's the problem in a public forum. If you get to a point where you state your opinion, maybe it's in a bar or something, and all of a sudden you're a troglodyte or a redneck or somebody that's not progressive, and then if it gets confrontational, the problem is, at what point, how do we balance that?
I think we balance it through free speech, honestly. There's a lot that can be done when again, what did they do? Right? It wasn't like they did anything other than this big parade. Now, yes, mind you, the guy in Michigan who was eating, the guy he met online. But, save that example, these folks were having a parade and making their voice heard. So I think that's what we do every day on this program, especially during Open Phone America, minus the parade. But it's kind of like a radio parade, if you will. And we support all the things that we support here, like America and faith and family, and all of our great callers. So thank you, Jim in Bowling Green, Kentucky. I appreciate it. Coming back to your calls and more, 833-4-VALDEZ, 833-482-5337. Don't go anywhere.
Call now, 833-4-VALDEZ. That's 833-482-5337. 833-4-VALDEZ. That's Valdez with an S.
All right, America, welcome back. I am Rich Valdez, and our telephone number, 833-482-5337, 833-4-VALDEZ. If you want to join our conversation, get your calls in now before we wrap up. But I teased the story, and I see that we have some calls on the line. Going to get to you momentarily. There was a story I talked about a little bit earlier. I just mentioned the headline. Nursing homes allegedly neglected residents and misused $83 million in funds, according to the New York Attorney General. And that's Letitia James. So we don't know if this is a politically motivated thing or not, but let's take a look here. The owners, operators, and landlords of 4 nursing homes in New York have for years misused more than $83 million in taxpayer money, according to her, Letitia James, leaving elderly people in their care dead, neglected, or humiliated by sitting in their own urine and feces. That's horrible. New York Attorney General Letitia James said in a Wednesday lawsuit. The nursing homes owned and operated by Centers for Healthcare include Beth Abraham Center in the Bronx, Buffalo Center for Rehabilitation and Nursing, Holliswood Center for Rehabilitation and Healthcare in Queens, and Maritime Center for Rehabilitation and Nursing in Westchester. Residents at these facilities suffered from severe dehydration, malnutrition, and increased risk of death, developing infections and sepsis from untreated bed sores and inconsistent wound care. Oh, this is a nightmare. I went through a little bit of this with my dad, who was here in my care, but because he couldn't move and he would always end up on his back, got a little bit of a bed sore. And that's tough to treat too. They sustained life-changing injuries from falls and died, according to the lawsuit. Man, I tell you. Then it goes on to talk about how they wasted all this money. I mean, this is just a horrible story. And, you know, it's funny. Today I told you, at a cocktail party, a mixer a little earlier. And one of the women there said, "Oh, I just want to thank you for, the work that you've done on the radio." And I said, "Oh, thanks. I appreciate that." And she said, "Yeah, I'm part of an organization, and our founders, I heard them on your show when I had a show in New York City from 10 a.m. in the morning to noon in the 12 noon, and it was two sisters that started an organization called Voices for Seniors, and they started Voices for Seniors because their mom was pronounced dead, and they weren't allowed to be there with her as she died. And it was just really tragic for them during the pandemic, as it was for so many people. But they made it a mission to help people in similar situations and make sure that doesn't happen again. Anyway, I bring all that up to say this is rough. And, I can't imagine I'm the only one that's ever been through that. So if you want to be heard on that topic, feel free. But right now I want to go to Frank in Evergreen, Montana. Frank, go right ahead. I know that you're pretty tough, so you're not one of these old people that are going to be left for dead, right?
I hope not. But hey, my dad started out in radio way back there, but radio was just started. My grandfather was fighting before World War I, and the Persian Revolution, and the family goes back. But a lot of kids these days, it's every 20 years you got to have a kid, but it's just
every 20 years. That's funny. Why would you have a kid every 20 years? To make sure you have a babysitter built in?
Yes, but hey, back, prior to the start of World War I, it was the Edison bullhorn that rallied everybody on WABC and all these New York streets. It was stirring up the mobs to get into World War I, and Hitler was using the same tactics, and all the other leaders, like Mussolini. It was the radio, the electronics of it, and then FM radio was invented later on, but it was as a different way of broadcasting, where you have towers going in an X and a Y pattern, and occupies too much land space, but it gives you that. It's a distorted kind of a sound, but it's interference, and I think AM is a better technology. But
yeah, well, I think that's why you see the reach of AM radio in so many places. Anyway, what does this have to do with Biden or the price of coffee in Brazil?
In Biden's case, he likes to use the power of the microphone, like he's a fighter, but it's all stage. And like what I heard was like an echo chamber, like a reverberation, like what you hear like on a Iranian radio station. It's just everything's echoey, or even in Mexico, you got the echo. It's just.
I don't know much about the Mexican echo, but I do know Yo Quiero Taco Bell. That's one of my favorites. Frank in Evergreen, Montana, KOFI. Thank you very much. Big shout out to everybody in the Kalispell area listening to KOFI. Always a pleasure to speak with you guys. We're going to get to your calls and more. We got calls from Alabama, from Syracuse, New York, and more straight ahead. Don't go anywhere.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. Call now, 833-4-VALDEZ. That's 833-482-5337. 833-4-VALDEZ. That's Valdez with an S. America at Night with Rich Valdez. Call now, 833-4-VALDEZ. That's 833-482-5337. 833-4-VALDEZ. That's Valdez with an S.
All right, America, welcome back. It's being reported that Madonna has been hospitalized for a serious bacterial infection, and she's been intubated. She's in intensive care. She was found unresponsive in New York City. And it's horrible, horrible news. I don't know much more than what's being reported here. Forced into a serious battle for her health after suffering a bacterial infection, which sent her to the ICU. And obviously her tour is now on hold. All right, here, getting an update in my ear. She's out of the ICU, which is great news. She was in the hospital. Do you know if they removed the tube? All right, so she's improving, and they expect a full recovery, and that's great. Good to know. It's always hit or miss. I went through that. I went through so many health scares with my dad, and I remember he'd gotten a bacterial infection, same thing, from, they don't know how people get those, but if they don't get treated, or if they don't respond to antibiotics, what ends up happening is it gets spread to your blood and then become a septic infection. And when that happens, it could take forever because they're very resistant to antibiotics. So, needless to say, very difficult thing to deal with. And every doctor you talk to, whether it's the infectious disease specialist or the intensivist or the regular doctor or the pulmonologist, they all kind of, tiptoe around and tell you, yeah, this could be it. This is very serious, and it is. So when I read that, I was taken aback. Again, I'm not a huge Madonna fan. Matter of fact, I don't think I have a favorite song of Madonna's, but she's Madonna. She's an 80s pop icon, and who doesn't love some Madonna, right? Papa don't preach. There you go. Anyway, back to your calls. Let's do it. Syracuse, New York, WGVA. Charles, go right ahead. You're on with Rich Valdez. Welcome.
Rich, you must know that the homosexual lifestyle and transgender are condemned in the Bible. And in both cases, Leviticus 20, verse 13, and Deuteronomy 22, verse 5, that one of them is a death penalty, the homosexuals, and the other one is called an abomination, which means you go to hell in both cases. So anybody that even thinks of getting into that is really not thinking clearly.
All right, playing with fire.
Think of it.
Yeah, good point.
And,
I hear you on that one, Charles, and I appreciate it. Big shout out to everybody in Syracuse, New York, WGVA. Let us continue our little journey across America from Syracuse, New York to Dothan, Alabama. WDBT. Scott, you're on with Rich Valdez. Go right ahead.
Hey, Rich, great to talk to you. I was reacting to that caller who pretty much threatened you. I took offense to that. I've got 6 kids and 3 grand youngins. Let them guys try to come after my kids, my grandkids. They're our future, and I'm not going to let this happen to my youngins.
I try to explain to anybody who's ever, asked these questions, mainly people who are like, what's it like having kids, people that are not parents. And, and I impress upon them, there's really like this one overarching job, which is that one, to protect your family, right? And whatever it takes, go down with the ship, do what you got to do. And it just amazes me that this is a thing, that we're even having this conversation, that there are a bunch of people, because of how they choose to live their life, have decided to include "and we're coming for your children" as part of a chant to make a social or political statement. I would not say that about anybody's children unless I was prepared for whatever consequence was coming my way. And, I don't know if I'm overreacting, but it sounds like you kind of took it the same way I did.
I did. I honestly did. I've got a few homosexual friends. When they heard about this, they got irate. They said, we are not about trying to get children into our lifestyle. When they get older and that's what they choose, then that's what they choose.
It's on them. Right. Yeah, we had a guest on about I don't know, I think it was last Monday. And she was conservative and, and she was very clear in that she said the LGBTQ movement didn't represent her because she wasn't part of all of those letters. She was only a lesbian, and that she was a homosexual. And she said, the part of the homosexual experience is to be one sex and like that same sex. And, it was a very simple but interesting point that she made, that she said, the whole transgender movement undermines the homosexual movement because you change your gender to become the opposite sex, which kind of flies in the face of being gay. And I'd never thought of it that way, but she brought it to my attention, and I thought it was interesting. So, there's a lot of people, I think, that are gay or lesbian or part of the LGBTQ community overall that are listening to what's going on with some of these comments from some of these groups, and they're saying, what the hell? What is going on here? They take exception to it as well, because, kids are off limits, and as should be one's faith and everything else. But sadly, it seems that people are just fascinated with going that way. Anyway, people want to touch the third rail, they may get burnt. Folks, don't go anywhere. Scott, thank you for the call. Big shout out to everybody in Dothan, Alabama, WDBT. I'm Rich Valdez. We're coming right back.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. Call now, 833-4-VALDEZ. That's 833-482-5337. 833-4-VALDEZ. That's Valdez with an S. Best head of hair in live late night radio 6 years in a row. It's Rich Valdez.
All right, we're about to wrap it up. But before we do, we got to check in with our friends in Tennessee and Ohio. So let us go first to Paul. Paul's in Zanesville, Ohio, WHIZ. Go right ahead, Paul.
Hey, good evening, Rich.
Yes,
I'm no Smokey the Bear or nothing, but I'd like to ask you about those fires up in Canada. I mean, I just got off work at 10 o'clock tonight and just caught your show in time. And I work at a big box store now. It's a retirement job. And we weren't even allowed outside today without a 95 mask on. And I'd just like to know, what's the status up there? I mean, this is pretty crazy. I mean, my wife come outside today and she said, man, it's burning my eyes. I mean, are they going to get this under control up there? I mean, this just seems pretty odd. I mean, you look out today and our whole sky gaze was just like real gray with smoke, and it smelled like somebody was actually burning in the backyard. I mean, what's the situation up there? Could you tell me?
Yeah, well, all I could tell you is I know that things continue over there, and the fires are tough to control, and as they blow this way, that way, whatever, it's amazing how they can predict this stuff. But I can tell you about the day that it got to New York. That was uncanny. I mean, talk about like close encounters of the third kind. The sky was orange. It smelled like people were burning newspapers in their fire pits outside. I mean, it was horrific. I didn't believe a word of what the news was saying because they were saying it's coming from Canada. And I was like, Canada? This is coming from my neighbor. It's like in your face. You could see the smoke. You could taste the smoke. It was horrible. And, yeah, I did not go outside without an N95. I've been in a fire. When I was 11 years old, I was in a fire. And I can tell you, it felt like just coming out of a building that was on fire. That's how bad it was. I'd never seen it before, that bad in New York. But that was the case.
Well, I think maybe they should look into that. You know, I don't know how well Canada's controlling
And Paul,
that,
just to give you a perspective, in Quebec, there's 113 fires. And in Montreal, I think there's 94. British Columbia, excuse me, 94 fires. These are simultaneously burning. So you're talking about 250 acres of land burning at the same time. 250,000, excuse me.
Yeah.
In 24 hours.
I was just wondering because it's bad. I mean, it was really bad here, and we're quite a way, down.
Oh yeah,
from
Ohio's plenty far from Canada. So is New York. I'm not talking about Albany. I'm talking about New York City. It's far. Yeah. It's amazing how that stuff makes its way.
Okay,
yeah, so
thank you for your time, Rich.
You got it, Paul.
About things like that. All right. Thank you.
The magic number, Paul, 483 fires that are actively burning right now. So prayers for everybody out in Canada. That's some crazy stuff. Let us go to Joanne, Greenville, Tennessee, WGRV. The RV should stand for Rich Valdez if it doesn't already. Joanne, go right ahead.
Oh, thank you so much, Rich, for being a defender of our faith, of our country.
Oh, thank you.
I'm a great grandma of 8.
Get out! You don't sound like you're old enough to be a great grandma of 8.
Well, but anyway, Satan is on the rampage, and we have a famine of the word.
Yeah.
And the only solution is go put on the whole armor of God, like it tells you in Ephesians 6:11 through 20.
Yeah,
And
sometimes
all these things that are going on about animals and woke and everything. Romans chapter 1 is, if someone read that whole thing.
Joanne, the music means I've got to go, but an excellent point you've made. When things are going haywire, turn to God, right? You can't go wrong with that. Thank you, Joanne. Big shout out to everybody in Greenville, Tennessee, WGRV. And, of course, thank you, everybody, for listening and tuning in tonight. We're going to do it again tomorrow. Hasta la próxima. Until the next time, take care, good night, and God bless. And keep it locked on this station because there's way more programming coming up. But we're doing it again tomorrow, so we'll talk at that time. Hasta la próxima. I'm Rich Valdez.